So how do we really know that the Bible you read today is what was originally written? I mean, the originals are long gone. In this explainer, we're diving into a perspective that doesn't just question the process. It makes the incredible claim that the most trusted ancient biblical texts are actually fakes, and it offers a radical new history in their place.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at how we even interpret texts. Then, we'll see how scholars traditionally try to piece them back together. After that, we'll dive into a fierce critique of those methods, which leads to claims of outright forgery. And finally, we'll explore a completely different version of the story.
All right, first up, we're exploring a really foundational idea from our source, that who you are, where you are, and, maybe most importantly, when you are, completely changes how you understand a text. According to this viewpoint, this is especially true when it comes to the Bible. Our personal backgrounds, our culture, our moment in history, it all acts like a pair of glasses, coloring everything we read, whether we even realize we're wearing them or not.
Just think about it. Medieval artists painted Bible characters living in European castles and wearing medieval clothes. They weren't trying to be inaccurate, they were just seeing this ancient story through the only lens they had, their own world. And this really sets the stage for a key question. What if modern scholars are doing the exact same thing?
Okay, so that brings us to the central puzzle. How in the world do scholars even try to reconstruct an ancient text when the original documents, the autographs, are gone?
And this, right here, is the fundamental problem. It creates the entire challenge. We don't have the originals. We only have copies of copies of copies. And guess what? They don't all say the same thing. This has led to a whole field of study dedicated to sorting out this massive puzzle.
Now, the conventional approach is called textual criticism. Think of it like detective work. Scholars use a specific set of rules to sift through thousands of different manuscript copies, trying to work their way backward to figure out what the author most likely wrote down in the first place.
But here is exactly where our source just throws a giant wrench in the works. It argues that calling this a science is a huge stretch. The claim is that these rules aren't some objective scientific principles, they're basically just subjective, educated guesses.
So let's actually dig into that. We're going to look at the core rules of textual criticism and see how this particular viewpoint tries to dismantle them one by one.
Okay, so a core principle in this field is that the more difficult or awkward reading is probably the original one. The idea is that scribes would tend to add little notes to clarify things, not make them more confusing. But this viewpoint calls that totally absurd. It argues that this assumption completely disrespects the skill of ancient scribes.
The argument here is that these weren't just any old documents being copied. The preservation of Scripture was treated as an official state matter by the Roman Empire. We're talking top-tier scribes, the best materials, and serious quality control, with some pretty severe penalties if you messed up. Now, the second big rule says you should trust the oldest, highest quality manuscripts, these ancient book-like documents called codices. But this is where our source makes a jaw-dropping claim, that the most famous of these, like the Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, are not just flawed, they are sophisticated forgeries. And the third rule? Well, it's pretty much dismissed as just crazy. The perspective here is that these supposed quality texts don't just disagree with the overwhelming majority of all other manuscripts out there, they're also wildly inconsistent with each other. So this leads us right into the most explosive part of the entire argument, the direct accusation of forgery, aimed squarely at the foundational manuscripts used in modern biblical scholarship.
The source presents this detailed conspiracy theory, and it centers on the Codex Sinaiticus, one of the oldest complete Bibles. It highlights the claim by a 19th century scholar that he himself forged it, and it even alleges there was a cover-up involving a missing page that would have proven his story.
And to bolster this wild claim, the source points to this number, 23,000. That is the number of corrections found in the manuscript. The argument is that this is absolute proof that it couldn't have been the work of a professional scribe under official watch. It looks more like a clumsy, amateur job. And look, this isn't just some dry academic disagreement. The source alleges that the famous 19th century scholars who championed these texts had a malicious, even evil agenda. And their work, which was based on these supposed forgeries, is the direct source of corruption in nearly every single modern Bible today. Okay, so after attempting to tear down the entire conventional history of how the Bible was passed down, the source we're looking at builds its own, completely different version of events right from the ground up. So, this alternative view suggests a totally different origin for the Gospels. one that pretty much bypasses the idea of oral tradition. It proposes that they were built from meticulous, contemporary records taken by professional government scribes, spies essentially, who were following Jesus around and later donated their notes to the church.
And how was this text preserved? Well, this theory argues for a perfect, unbroken chain of custody. It suggests that the Roman and then the Byzantine empires acted as guardians, ensuring flawless, state-sponsored preservation for over 1,000 years. This all culminated in a specific set of trustworthy manuscripts making their way to the West.
And this is the ultimate payoff for the entire argument. It concludes that this perfectly preserved line of text, which is known as the Textus Receptus, is the one true source, and it just so happens to be the foundation for the King James Version of the Bible.
So ultimately, when you put all the pieces together, the source frames this whole complicated history not as a story of scholarly debate and discovery, but as a cosmic battle, a battle between a divine plan for perfect preservation on one side and a deliberate human or maybe even demonic effort to corrupt the text on the other.
And that leaves us right here. This explainer has unpacked one very specific and deeply challenging answer to that question. It's an answer built on these incredible claims of conspiracy, forgery, and a completely alternate history. And it leaves all of us to wonder, in the absence of the original, how do we ever decide which version of the story we're supposed to trust?